Okay guys, on today's video we're going to be discussing the various explorers that came from Europe to the New World over sort of 100 years or so. What I need you guys to do is turn to page 11 and 12 in your red packet. And when you turn to those pages, what you will find is a series of maps with information to fill in below it. Now, you may have more information to write than will fit in those boxes. If that's the case, that's fine. Just use a sheet of paper. And as always, make sure that you pause the video whenever you need to if you miss something or whatever. So the first person, before we get started, I want to make sure that we talk about something. This sheet that you're copying them down on is designed as a review, so it doesn't go in chronological order. It actually sort of seems random. It doesn't go in any particular order. Because of that, there's going to be an extension activity that you will do afterwards in class that will help to make everything more chronological for you. So, the first person that we have on your worksheet is Sir Francis Drake. Sir Francis Drake was from England, and he sailed in 1540, or he was alive between 1540 and 1596. He becomes the first Englishman to circumnavigate the world. He's not the first person ever to do it, but he is the first Englishman too. Now, we talked about that word circumnavigate earlier in class, and remember that that word itself means to travel around the world. So he is one of the very first people to leave from Europe and make it all the way across the country. Across the oceans. His major job is that he used cartographers or map makers. That word cartographer means map makers, to map the western coast of North America. Because remember, even 100 years before Sir Francis Drake traveled, we had no concept of how large North and South America were. So one of his jobs, his responsibilities, was to map the coast of North and South America. He also, if you recall, when we talked about Queen Elizabeth I, we discussed that she was involved in the defeat of the Spanish Armada. He's the commander that does that. Now, these other sections, you'll notice that you have a wide variety on different pages of these sort of gold and blue extra tidbits. These pieces are things that previous courses that I've given, students have come up with ways to remember certain people. And I believe there's a Drake song that discusses starting from the bottom and being at the top. And so that's where that comes from. We'll compare that when we get to Magellan to that course route. The next person that we have is Hernando Cortez. You'll see his name spelled differently and you'll see his name written differently. Sometimes it's just Hernan and it doesn't have the do. And sometimes instead of a Z, it's an S. Doesn't matter, guys. It's the same person. Hernando Cortez was a conquistador from Spain. A conquistador is someone who conquered. He was a soldier. He was actually not authorized to enter Mexico. There were some orders given that he would explore parts of Mexico looking for gold, looking for spaces to make more colonies, that sort of thing. His orders were rescinded. His orders were taken back, and he basically said, well, I don't care, and went anyway. And he actually would have gotten in a lot of trouble with it, except that he then conquers all of Mexico. Cortez is actually known for killing a lot of people. He banded together various indigenous groups to have warfare against the Aztecs. It's pretty rough. The major thing to help you remember with Cortez is that there is a Z in Cortez. I'll always have a Z in it, as well as with Aztec. So they're all in brown. Our next person is Vasco da Gama. He's actually the first European, the second European that you'll need to know chronologically. Vasco da Gama is actually from Portugal. You'll notice the G in da Gama is for the G in Portugal. And he is the first European to have taken a boat all the way to India, which doesn't sound like a big deal, except that you need to remember that before, when you had a ship or a shipment of goods, you were trying to trade with, say, the Ottoman Empire, which is over here in the Middle East, right, the Ottomans, you either would take it from Portugal through the Straits of Gibraltar around Italy to land and then take it across India, where you've got deserts and mountains, or you took it like up through north through Europe, and again that would be much longer, and then into the Ottoman Empire and then across. Going all the way around Africa actually saves a ton of money. It doesn't seem like it, but it really is much more economically feasible to go around Africa than it would be to negotiate with the various empires, most notably the Ottomans, that are in the way between Europe and India. Now, the G's go together, and that's obviously the easiest part of it, but other people in previous classes also thought that this general route, and I should have changed the color, sorry, looks sort of like a giant G shape. So if that helps, great. Our next explorer, Francisco Pizarro, is another one from Spain. You'll notice a trend that most of them are from Spain. He's another conquistador just like Cortez was, only he works through South America. He's very, very famous for being very, very harsh, very ruthless, horrible, horrible person to the indigenous populations, to the Inca that were living there. He did, however, found the city of Lima, which is in present-day Peru, which became a huge capital for the Spanish in South America. If you notice, you'll love his very fluffy hat he has here. I love his hat. And also that Pizarro and Inca are both I. So that'll help you remember that Pizarro was the Incan conqueror. Next up is Jacques Cartier. It's not Jacques, it's Jacques. It's Cartier, it's French. And because he's French, he goes to the north and he conquers essentially parts of present-day Canada. So Jacques Cartier is the first person to establish what would be known as New France for a while. It's what you've always learned as Canada. And he's very notable for exploring the St. Lawrence River and the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which separate Maine from Canada in present-day times. Ferdinand Magellan is the very first person to lead an expedition that circumnavigates the globe. There's that circumnavigated word again. Remember that he leaves from Spain and he travels down from Spain past Latin America, bottom of South America, goes across, and when he comes into the Philippines, he has an encounter with a native group in the Philippines. He's actually killed in that attack. So he didn't personally circumnavigate the globe. If I take away where I wrote in the brown, you can see that there's red and there's blue colors indicating where he was and was not alive during his voyage. He does, however, get credit for it posthumously after his death because he was the one leading the expedition itself. Now, remember we talked about comparing him to Drake. Drake circumnavigates, but Drake comes from England, which is way up at the top, and then he comes down and he follows the coast all the way up to approximately Washington before peeling off. So those are the differences. This would be Drake, while the bottom one is Magellan. Everybody's favorite, Christopher Columbus. You learned that he sailed from Spain, he discovered the New World, yada yada, which you learned when you were little. Well, he's technically Italian and sails for Spain. They're looking for a western water route because going around Africa is really expensive still, and he thought, well, maybe we can just go west and we'll hit Asia, we'll hit the East Indies, and it'll be fine. He actually lands in the Caribbean, which he renames the West Indies, and establishes the first permanent colonies there. Now, you've always learned the first permanent colony was Jamestown. That's the first permanent English colony to survive. Columbus is the first to colonize the New World. Columbus is the first one to take people across the ocean, leave them there, and return to Europe. Columbus actually makes 3 large treks across the Atlantic Ocean in his lifetime. And there, of course, you have Columbus and colonies. Francisco Coronado, we've talked about this a little bit. Coronado explored the Colorado. He explores the southwestern portion of the United States. He's the first European to find the Colorado River, and as well the Grand Canyon, which is the river that created the Colorado River is the river that created the Grand Canyon. So he claims what's today the western portion of the United States for Spain. And last but not least, Ponce de Leon, who is the Spanish explorer who is famous for searching and potentially finding, we don't really know what happened to him, the Fountain of Youth. That's not exactly why he's important historically. He's important historically because he established Florida as a colony of Spain. So when you learn about American colonization in the early years of the United States, Florida was not a state that was part of the British system. We actually acquire Florida much later from the Spanish in some war and trading treaties. All right, well, that is it for this video. Make sure that you guys have it all written down, and we will discuss the extensions later. Thanks.